Locker Room, with all the sports news you need, live.
Good afternoon. Graham. It's Sunday afternoon. It's 3 o'clock and... Oh, have I frozen? Am I here?
You're back again, mate.
The Locker Room on a Sunday afternoon with myself. Oh, there we go. It's Sunday afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. My name is Graham Duffy. We are here until 5 o'clock. You can get in touch in ways through Facebook Live. We are live on YouTube and we are live on Twitter. Note that there is no mic this afternoon. The show can only go up from here. And instead, I am delighted to be joined, as he has been many a time on this show, by the wonderful host of the Thursday Night Your Country and the Saturday show, the big Saturday show at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. It's the wonderful Mr. James E. James, thank you, mate. How are you this fine afternoon?
I am absolutely tickety-boo, to steal a wee phrase from Billy Connolly. I was watching Billy Connolly last night on the TV, so... But no, good.
I am
good.
A massive fan of Billy Connolly, so... Fantastic. So, to talk about the 6 Premiership games that took place yesterday, normally on a Sunday, we usually have a live game, but we don't actually have that because all the games on a Saturday, which is good. We'll see on the tagline at the bottom, VAR has played a big part in this weekend, which we'll get to. We will start our weekend, and I'm dreading going to Pittodrie, but I'll leave that till maybe later. But we will start at the game at Celtic, where Celtic, the league leaders and champions, took Hibernian. Celtic had to come from 1-0 down. Josh Campbell had put him 1-0 up after minutes. Eli Yuan was sent off after 24, which we'll get to very shortly. But Celtic hit back in the second half to a second half penalty from Jota, a goal from O, and a goal from Haksabanovic. So, James, we'll get to Hibs in the game in a minute, but another massive, massive win for Celtic. Maybe not at their fluent best, but all that matters is they got 3 points.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you become used to them sort of blowing teams away, especially when they're at home, with the style of play that they have. So I suppose from a fan's perspective, you're kind of expecting that that's going to happen every game. But they've had a few games now where, you know, the opposition have been very stubborn. And on a couple of occasions, they've gone behind and they've managed to find a way of getting back into it. And it's an old cliche, but that is what makes champions. You know, the ability to turn the game round. And they didn't have a particularly good day at the office, Celtic as a football team, but a lot of that was down to the tactics that were used by Hibs.
In terms of Celtic, when we'll get to the actual game in a minute, but how blow is it? We've got 2 weeks till the national break now, but how big a blow was it for Celtic that we lost Rio Hatate and Amoy during the game?
Yeah, I didn't see the game live, so it was only sort of like afterwards I found out that, you know, those 2 players had gone down. I suppose with a 2-week break, depending on the severity of the injuries, a 2-week break possibly might be enough for them to get back so that, you know, there won't really seem to be any interruption. Hatate, I would venture to say, would probably be a bigger loss than Aaron Moy, although Aaron Moy's been excellent since he returned from the World Cup at the end of last year. But I just think that Rio Hatate is the guy that really makes that middle part of the Celtic team tick, you know. But in saying that, I think they've got an able deputy in Matt O'Reilly. So even if Hatate is going to be out, it might upset the flow a little bit. But, you know, Matt O'Reilly can come in, as can David Turnbull. And to be honest, I'm quite surprised that Turnbull doesn't play more often.
Comment here from Only As Good As Your Lad podcast, who I know who that is, who says, yes, lads, nice to hear you. Well, you don't have to just hear us, you can see us, because we're live on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. You can see our faces all the time. It's great, isn't it?
Maybe he doesn't want to scare the wife and kids.
Well, I scare mine enough, to be honest, so that's probably not a bad idea. But I mean, in terms of Rio Hatate, just how good has Hatate been this season? Because I've said to Mike that I think Hatate has been probably for me one of the best players in the league this season. He's been absolutely outstanding for Celtic.
In my humble opinion, I think he should be the player of the year. I think he's been that good. And he's really been that good since he came to the club. I mean, you think back to when he came in January of last year, in that first game that he played against Rangers, he was just absolutely on fire. And he's carried on. And it was interesting that Ange Postecoglou said a few times, that there is more to come from him, and a lot of people were like, really? But I could kind of see it myself where Postecoglou was coming from. The guy has come in sort of mid-season. He's played a lot of football when he was in Japan as well, and then he's came over here and he was more or less straight into the team. He benefited from the summer holidays, I would say, and he's come back since then, and he's just been absolutely electric. He is a player who I have a lot of admiration for. Even if he wasn't playing for Celtic, I would have a lot of admiration for him because he's such a technically gifted player.
I'm going to come back to the actual game in a minute, but I wanted to ask you, James, as a Celtic fan. I kind of asked Michael this as well on Friday, but you followed football for a long, long time. I've followed football since probably about 1980. In terms of the Celtic squad, is this one of the best Celtic squads you've seen, or how high up do you rate this current Celtic squad?
I think it probably is one of the best squads that I've seen in my lifetime. Although I'm very biased in as much as I don't think there'll ever be a Celtic squad like the Lisbon Lions. But then I was fortunate enough to be around at the time when they won that European Cup. So they were just an outstanding group of players. The fact that they all came from within a relatively speaking, short distance of Glasgow, that's something that's never going to happen again for any team, because of the international nature of the game now. There have been some really outstanding Celtic teams since then. I think when Martin O'Neill came in, he pulled the Celtic team up by the bootstraps and developed a super team. And then obviously they had that run to Seville, which was absolutely magic. I know a lot of people might not agree with me, but Brendan Rodgers did pretty much the same thing when he came in. He got a team they weren't a bad team when he came in, but, he took them up a level, took them on. They sort of slipped back a little bit after he went. And then obviously when Postecoglou came in, it was like, this is going to take this guy forever to get this squad up and running. But you know what? He has done such a super job. And I reckon, in my humble opinion, it would be the Lisbon Lions, Martin O'Neill. I would say Postecoglou's team is just slightly better than Brendan Rodgers. And I would put Brendan Rodgers' team in fourth place.
Yeah, it's a very good list of managers and players you got there, but this is a very Celtic squad. And obviously yesterday, I'm looking at the stats, 79% possession for Celtic, 39 on target, 15 off target. But there was another contentious moment in the game. Now, Billy Yuan was booked for a challenge on Carlos. I'm not entirely sure the first booking was a booking, but fair enough. And then in the kind of halfway line, Eli Yuan is being dragged back by Carter Vickers. Carter Vickers goes to head the ball. Eli Yuan's foot does catch him, but for me, that should be a foul on Eli Yuan and not a second booking. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously I had mentioned in the group's WhatsApp chat about, the sending off. And I think it was yourself that said to me, you didn't think that it was a second yellow and therefore a red. So it wasn't until I watched the highlights earlier on this morning that I actually saw the incident. I think the first one was probably just a deserved yellow card. It was a bit of a rash tackle. It wasn't a dangerous tackle, but it was a rash tackle. So I could see why that was given. The first watch of the foul where he gets his second yellow card, I did think, they've got it right. But then once I'd saw a couple of replays of it, no, it should have been a foul against Carter Vickers. And there was no way that he deliberately kicked Carter Vickers in the head. Carter Vickers was putting his head towards the ball. Ellie Yuan was trying to get the ball, and the two players, the head and boot, came together. It was never another booking, let alone, meriting getting him sent off. So very controversial, and probably did make a huge change to the game, in as much as it meant that Hibs then sort of had to become quite tortoise-like, and revert into their shell for huge parts of the game. And I think had they had 11 players on the park, it might have been a far more entertaining game.
I mean, I think at first viewing, you can maybe say the referee kind of thought maybe it was a second yellow, but when you actually watch it again and again, you can see that Elian's not done a lot wrong. He's the one being fouled. Carter Vickers is over the top of him. He then goes to win the header. Elian cannot know that Carter Vickers is going to do that and put his head down. And you're right, he does. Yes, he does catch him, but it's not deliberate. It's not deliberate. There's no way he's known about that. For me, and we'll get to a few decisions again that happened in a couple of other games as well. But for me, Lee Johnson was raging, and I can understand why, because that play doesn't necessarily won the game, but that's a massive part in that game.
Yeah, absolutely. Any sending off in any game has a huge impact in the game, regardless, And I always think I would much rather a team had all players on the park for 90 minutes, even if some of them were flirting with disaster because they were on the yellow card and they were still being a bit kind of reckless with some of their challenges. But, I always think that the referee has to be a wee bit more circumspect, if you like, initially when he's going to give out yellow cards. But then when he's got a player on a yellow, for me, it has to be something really bad to merit, getting that second one and then getting sent off, unless he does something that is just a straightforward red card, even though he's already on a booking. So I do have a certain amount of sympathy for referees, although I'm quite vocal, and a lot of people know that I think Scottish referees are probably amongst the worst in the world. But, that's a different argument for a different time. But there are times when, you watch some games and you see a referee and he is genuinely trying to let the game flow. And it's only because of the stupidity of some players where he has to start flashing yellow cards and stuff like that. They want to get the game moving, because I honestly don't think any referee goes out at the start of a game and thinks, right, I'm going to book 6 players, or I'm going to send a player off. I really don't think they have that in their mind when they go out onto the pitch. I'm sure they think to themselves that, let's hope, a bit like a boxing referee, let's have a good clean fight,
I think the other thing is as well, though, that Stephen McLean, the referee, actually played advantage. He had played on. He didn't think it was at first, and then he's gone back and booked Juan, which I found was very harsh. But having said that, Hibs took a very surprising lead through a penalty from Josh Campbell from a foul by Starfelt on Hanlon. Any complaints about that? It looked quite a clear pullback from Starfelt. Any complaints about that being a penalty?
No, it was a stonewaller. And see, to be honest with you, I think more players should get penalised for that than does. Any sort of pulling a player back, wrestling a player to the ground in the penalty area, for me, that should be an automatic penalty every time. Because the only way you're going to stop them from doing it is to keep punishing them for doing it. And if you don't have that consistency, then players continue to do it. And you see it every time you watch a game of football. No matter where it is that you're watching the game, wherever it's being played, you see that kind of carry on going on in the box. Some referees in some leagues are really good about it. They might not always give a penalty, but they'll maybe stop the game and they'll go over and, have a few stern words with the players. But it's something that really needs to be stamped down on hard, to prevent it. Because, I always remember, oh God, I can't remember the player's name now, but there was a Scottish player, centre back, who almost every game you watched, you could guarantee that had the referee been awarding a penalty for pulling people back, his team would have had penalties given to them right, left, and centre in every game. It's just like, yeah, I just wonder sometimes. I get why they're doing it, but I just wonder sometimes. You're taking a huge chance, and if the game's sort of like 1-1, and you're going into like the 93rd minute on a 4 minutes of added on time, and you haul somebody down and the referee gives a penalty and they score, I think you should get punished by the club with some sort of fine. Whether or not they publicise it's another matter, but you've cost your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Dean Clark, who I know because he's in my Hearts group chat, he's a Hearts supporter. The Hibs red cards is absolutely brutal. CCV is pulling on a Hibs player. Free kick the other way from me. Yeah, we've just said exactly the same thing. It should have been a first. But Hibs do go 1-0 up. A good penalty from Josh Campbell. Hibs managed to get to half time at 1-0 up. But then Celtic come back into the game through a penalty of their own through Jota. Again, this has been very contentious because if you've watched the TV highlights from last night, Cockers, he's a big laddie, he seems to throw himself to the ground. Now, Hanlon does have a pull on him at first, but he lets him go. And it seems like Cockers just thrown him to the ground. Is that a penalty?
In that instance, I wouldn't have given a penalty, because it's not an instantaneous thing. As you say, there's the foul, then there's a kind of like a break, and then, the player's down, So to me, it needs to be like the one movement, for me to say, yeah, that's a definite penalty. But from a fan's point of view, you're always going to be screaming, that you're wanting the penalty for it. That's just how it is. But having looked at it a couple of times, seen it a couple of times in replays and stuff like that, no, I don't think it should have been a penalty.
I mean, they were talking about this in the sports scene last night, and I've seen a few other folks saying Carter Vickers was a bit embarrassing. He's a big laddie, and he threw himself to the ground a little bit. And I think if you're an opposition manager, you'd be disappointed you've lost a penalty for that. So I can understand Lee Johnson's frustration for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the other side of that argument as well.
Penalty.
Sorry, there's also the other side of that argument as well, whereby you could argue that because he's a big fella, therefore his momentum is greater than, a player who's a light, slighter frame. So therefore, he goes down, But no, even if you were trying to use that argument, for me, it would still be no, not a penalty.
Well, Jota, maybe slightly fortunate David Marshall just about saves that. What do you make of Jota this season? I've said again, I think Jota's one of these. When I was a youngster, I was brought up with guys like John Cahoon. I watched Alan Johnson at Tynecastle. I love players that kind of, once they got on the ball and make things happen and got you off your seat, basically. What have you made of Jota's form this season for Celtic?
A little bit up and down. When he's on his game, he's virtually unplayable, and he kind of makes me think of Jimmy Johnson. I've seen him a couple of times when he's really been up for it, and he's taken a player on and he's beaten the player, and you can see almost into his mind, and he's thinking, right, these other two guys are coming towards me. I'm going to do them as well. Unlike Jimmy Johnson, who had the cheek to actually turn back and beat the same player twice or three times. He doesn't do that, but you can almost see your thought process in him. When he does that and it works, you just know that he's going to have one of those games when he's going to be on fire. But he is a player that is a flair player. He's a player that entertains, and by that token, if he is having an off day, he's also going to be somebody that's going to frustrate the life out of you as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the sending off did change the game because Celtic, from then on, pretty much dominated the game. I should expect at Celtic Park. And this relentless pursuit of the second Premiership title carries on. And the second goal does come from O. Now, I have to say, I've actually been quite impressed with him. He looks a physical presence. He puts himself about. And it's a great header. A really good ball in from the corner. And he basically, I think it's Paul Hanlon. It's a great header. Again, he's maybe not had a lot of game time, But so far, I think whenever he's played, has looked very, very dangerous.
Yeah, he certainly is. And like you say, he is a very physical player, and he's a strong player. And when you saw the sort of replays of when he scores his goal, they're actually trying to pull him back, before the ball comes in towards him. And he just kind of shrugs the Hibs defender off, and then the ball comes in and he just bullets at it, and it's in the back of the net. I really don't think he should have been booked for taking his shirt off. I think that's a nonsense, it's just how it is. But unfortunately, that's how it is.
I hate that rule. Honestly, I hate that rule.
But it just shows that the boy has got a passion. Now I don't know what it was like when he played for his team in Korea. Whether he behaved like that when he was there or not, I don't know. But you can see what it meant to him, when he's scoring there for Celtic Football Club. And obviously the fans love him. You can tell that. Whenever he comes on, there's a huge kind of lift in the fans because they kind of think something's going to happen. And as you say, even if he doesn't score, he's a kind of player that then the centre backs have to really pay attention to, because the minute they drop their guard, he's going to get in there. I'd love to see him up against the likes of Connor Goldson.
I know that we've probably... Well, that'll happen soon, but I know that you spoke about this, myself and you, and I think me and Will spoke about this as well, but there was a lot of talk about when Giakoumakis left, would Celtic be able to cope physically? Do you think has been a really good addition to the side? And do you think, actually, in terms of that, Giakoumakis hasn't really been that much of a miss after all?
I don't really think we're missing Giakoumakis, kind of the way that a lot of fans thought we would do. And then obviously comes in, and let's be honest, 99.9% of us in this country will know nothing about the Korean Football League, and we won't see the games, so we don't really know the players until they come over here into Europe. But he's such a strong player, and he's slightly different from Giakoumakis because of the strength. It's a different strength that he has, and he's not going to get muscled, out of going for a tackle. Whereas Giakoumakis, on occasions, could be sort of pushed off the ball. I don't really see many people doing that to O. I think he's got a great upper body strength.
Yeah, another player that I've been very impressed with scored the decisive goal. Said Haksabanovic, a really, really good curling finish in the bottom corner. He's maybe not had a lot of game time, but again, he's one of these players. And again, I've said to Michael as well, Celtic is ridiculous. They can bring players off the bench that when they come on make a difference. Yeah. Hacks did that yesterday. It's a fantastic finish. Again, do you think Haksabanovic maybe deserves more game time, or is it just a case of being patient, biding your time? Because the way that Celtic are playing just now, it is very hard to get in that starting 11.
It's a little bit of both, If he gets an opportunity to get a run in the team, I honestly think he would make himself almost unpickable. They would have to have him in the team. But he has to bide his time. There are players who are there in front of him, predominantly Maida. And, I've got a lot of time for Maida. I think he's a super player. And he's like the Duracell bunny. He just keeps going, I think they plug him into the wall as soon as he comes off the pitch, and he stays there plugged in until the next game. That's the only thing I can think of why he's got tremendous energy. So it's very difficult to put somebody like that out of the team. But I think if he was to get a run in the team, he would become quite hard to put out. And what was interesting for me with that goal was it was almost a carbon copy of the goal he scored against Hearts. Instead of it being in the top corner, though, this time it was in the bottom corner. But it was pretty much the same way that he took it. The ball was passed into him, he cut inside, and then he curled it, around the defence and the goalkeeper. Super technique.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at that Celtic bench yesterday. Abada, Bain, Bernabe, Haksabanovic, Kobayashi, Ralston, Summers, and Turnbull. And again, another player that I think, I do like, and probably unfortunate that he can't get in that Celtic team, because if he could, I think he would be a starter for Scotland's David Turnbull. do you feel a bit sorry for David Turnbull that, again, with that Celtic midfield of like Hatate, Moy and McGregor, it is very hard to break into that Celtic team. So when you do come on, you've got to impact. And to be fair, Turnbull tends to do that when he comes on.
Yeah, he's very much an impact player, you know. So he can make a difference to a game. But I do think, personally, he should be in the team far more often, because he does give something a wee bit different from, you know, the Moyes and the Hatatis and the Matt O'Reillys, you know, and he's got a super football brain. I would hate to see him leave Celtic, but hand on my heart, I think, you know, there is going to come a point when he might have to do that to get, you know, regular first team football.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the rest of the season so far, obviously there's the split. After the break, Celtic play Ross County away. Then they've got Rangers at home. They play Kilmarnock away. They play Motherwell at home. And then, or they've got Rangers in the semi-final of the Scottish Cup, which I think they probably will win. Do you, obviously, you're a Celtic fan, so, but do you really, because I don't think Celtic will lose it. They're far too strong. But do you see anybody stopping Celtic? And as well, they've got the massive semi-final against Rangers to come. Can Celtic do the treble? Because I think there's every chance they're going to. I think the league's done. They've won the League Cup. That Rangers game then becomes massive. Do you think that they are going to win the treble?
Let me say that depending on what happens with the semi-final will determine whether or not they get a treble. It's going to be a bit more difficult because they're going to play Rangers in the semi-final. Because on paper, Rangers should be the next strongest team and therefore potentially the team that can prevent them from doing well. But the way that they dismantled Rangers in the League Cup final, I don't like to say that they've got like an Indian sign on Rangers, but I'm sure that for some of the Rangers players, you know, when they're coming up against Celtic, there is probably a slight doubt at the back of their mind about how the game's going to turn out for them. But yeah, I think probably a treble is very achievable.
Yeah, Jamie Anderson says Turnbull to Hart. I'll take that, but no, us, we probably play him at centre back because we're playing Lawrence Shankland just centre back. But I'll get to Hart shortly. I'm trying to put myself off the yes, but I will get to that. But in terms of Hibs, they're Hibs are sitting fifth, 40 points. They're 5 points off Hearts. I never thought I'd be delighted for Celtic to win. Yeah. But after in terms of, do you think Lee Johnson has turned Hibs round? Because after they got beat the 2 Cup, there was a lot of Johnson under pressure, but he has managed to change things. And yesterday, the sending off didn't help. But do you think he can turn Hibs to a bit more stable now?
I would like to think so. In all honesty, I thought that Lee Johnson would have Hibs a bit higher up the table than what they are at the moment. And let's be honest, they did almost flip with being right down there at one point. You know, they went into a bit of a tailspin. But they have come back, and the last couple of games, you know, they've played teams that potentially, you know, should be league winners season in, season out, because they're the richest clubs. They have the strongest squads in theory. And then everybody else is sort of scrabbling about, you know, trying to get sort of third place and so on and so forth. But I think, assuming that, you know, they stay kind of like in that top 6, I think give Lee Johnson the summer to bring in some more players of his own, you know, type, then I think there'll be a pretty good squad for the next season. Because Hearts and Aberdeen are the teams that Hibs should be targeting to, you know, leapfrog. But it's not going to happen this season, I don't think. Certainly from a Hearts perspective.
Well, between Hearts and 6. There's only 6 points. It's a very, very tight kind of tight top 6 stat. It's very, very difficult, and I think there are a few teams that maybe could break into that top 6. I mean, I'm looking at the league now. St Mirren are on 38 points, Johnson on 32. It's very tight in that league. But I do think he has turned Hibs round, but I think the biggest blow for them, because I think Eli Yuan had his best player for a few weeks. Now he's suspended, and obviously you can't appeal. So he'll be suspended, which is a massive blow for Hibs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I don't quite understand why, they can't appeal that, because any sort of person with a bit of common sense, if they look at that, they'll come to the same, well, I would think they would come to the same conclusions as we did, that his boot meeting Carter Vickers' head was an accidental thing, so it's not like he deliberately went out to try and kick that player and cause him any harm. So, in that instance, I think it should be a case that they should say, right, okay, let's, suspend, not necessarily rescind it, but say, right, let's suspend the fact that he's going to be suspended for the next couple of games, and if he commits a serious foul in the next game or the next game after that, then we can put that retrospectively, we can put that ban back in place. From a Hibs perspective, that would be the ideal scenario.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, let's move to the other side of Glasgow. I will get to Hearts very shortly because I'm going to go on a rant about that very shortly. But we will go to Motherwell against Rangers. Celtic had to come from a goal down. Kevin Van Veen gave Motherwell the lead, but a free kick from James Tavernier after 20 minutes, although I think Liam Kelly should do better. Sakala makes it 200 Rangers just after half-time. Bevis Mugabe made it 2-2, but goals from Todd Cantwell and Malik Tillman gave Rangers a 4-2 win. Callum Slattery was sent off for a second booking, which again, I'll get to that shortly, but again, I think that's very harsh as well. I think Todd Cantwell does not do himself any favours. But in terms of Rangers, again, all they can do is win. I don't think it was massively convincing. But for Michael Beale, all they can do is win games, James. And to be fair, he is doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And take my hat off to him. He's turned a squad of players, because it's essentially the same squad of players, that Van Bronckhorst had, apart from a couple of additions. And he's essentially sort of pulled them up by the bootstraps, and they're winning games where earlier in the season, they would have gone to the likes of Motherwell, and if they'd gone one down, they might have got it back to 1-1, maybe gone 2-1, but then if they had lost a second goal, it probably would have ended at the very least in a draw, because they just didn't seem to be able to take themselves that extra effort. Now that they've got that sort of belief in themselves, and they're pushing for that, that winner when, but that to a certain extent they're very lucky, in a lot of the games they have been quite lucky, in getting the wins. But do you know what? You need luck when you're playing football every bit as much as you need the skill.
Motherwell did take the lead through a goal from Kevin Van Veen, and again, it's contentious. Max Johnson onside or not. It's very hard to tell from the camera angle if he was onside, but it's a great ball in. Kevin Van Veen, 18 goals this season. I mean, let's be honest. If it wasn't for Van Veen, Motherwell would be in massive, massive trouble this season.
Absolutely. And he's one of the... Motherwell have got a bit of a knack for this, where they bring players in that nobody's ever heard of before. And they just hit the ground running, and they are the guys that are keeping the team up there. I mean, I remember Louis Moult from a few years ago. He practically, hauled that Motherwell side, through games on his own just by the goals that he was scoring, and to a certain extent, Van Veen's the same, and he's such a good player as well, which is something that a lot of people I don't think give him credit for. He is a good player. His positional sense is very good, and he scores, with his feet, with his head, kind of an all-round striker.
Yeah, goal comes Tavernier, his, I think it was 98th goal for Rangers, although about 97 have been penalties, but you can only score what you've got. But yeah, it was a decent free kick, but for me, maybe I'm being harsh, but I think Liam Kelly's got to do better there. It's a decent free kick, but Liam Kelly basically shows him the whole hand side. It's the only place that he can put it. Liam Kelly, for me, doesn't move his feet quick enough. I think he's got to do better there.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And that was my first thought when I saw it. That the goalkeeper had given him far too much of a target to go for. I suppose to a certain extent, that part of the goal, in theory, that's the wall's job to protect that. But if a player goes over the wall or gets round the wall with his free kick, the goalkeeper then has to be in a position, whether it's to the left or to the right of the goalkeeper, he has to be kind of like more central, if you like, so that he's not stretching so far when he's diving to try and get to the ball. And that's essentially how that worked out. He was just a little bit too much over on his left-hand side. So when the ball came by, he was despairingly diving. I'm not saying that he would have saved it had he been, say, a couple of inches more to the right, but he would have probably had a better chance of preventing that from going in the net had he been a couple of inches more on the right-hand side.
Yeah, well, Rangers did get in front in the second half, 46 minutes. Sebastian Sakala with a goal. Again, a pretty simple finish. But I think, actually, the last few weeks, Sakala has been probably one of Rangers' best players. He's looked a lot lovelier than, Morelos, but that's probably not hard. But he took his goal well, and Rangers were in the lead. It didn't last because Mugabe equalises after 59 minutes. Another Stramasha would call it in the box, and he finishes it well. Rangers do get back in front, but again, there's been a lot of controversy about this goal. Again, it's very hard to tell the way the lines are kind of drawn, but it's very hard to tell if Sakala's offside. Now, I know that, again, Melville's not happy about that, but from the TV highlights, it's very hard to tell if that's onside or not with the way the lines are drawn.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought was he was offside. And even when they were doing the VAR check and they come up and, they put the line on the screen and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, and this is the Doubting Thomas in me, if you like. I'm thinking to myself, now, has the referee put that line just that little bit further forward to show the player is onside? Or is he actually reflecting, what the positions are with all the players? So I'm a bit cynical in that respect, but he probably was just on. He probably was just on. So you can't take away from it. It was a brilliant cross into the box, and it was finished really, really well. But again, it's in a sense possibly VAR did do its job properly there. To a certain extent. There's obviously going to be Motherwell fans and other football fans who will disagree with that point of view. But I personally feel that in that instance, they probably did just get it right. You're looking stunned, Graham.
I've heard this kind of comment a couple of times over the last couple of days. No. It's just I've heard this comment a couple of times in the last few days. But do you think that when it's as tight as that the advantage should always be for the attacking team?
On the one hand, I would love to say yes every time. But in all honesty, in a situation like that, I think they should probably err on the side of caution and, make the decision in favour of the defending team. Because, the way that the offside rule works, even without VAR, right? I mean, the way that the offside rule works, if a hair in your leg is past the last defender, technically speaking, you're offside because a ball could hit that hair on your leg and go in the net. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but, that's the theory behind it. So if the player's toe is just ever so slightly beyond that line, but the way that they've drawn the line, it looks as if he's onside, I think you should give it to the defender You should give them the benefit of the doubt, because attackers often get that sort of benefit, when they don't really deserve it. It's a bit like goalkeepers. Goalkeepers are probably the most protected species of animal on this planet, more so than a lot of the animals that are actually close to extinction.
I actually agree with that. They do get off with a lot of stuff, but Malik Tillman does make it 4-2. Again, I think impressive for Rangers, a decent finish as well. And then again, a bit of controversy, and then the game was pretty much finished. 76 minutes gone. Callum Slattery's first yellow card, absolutely no issue with that. But the one that he gets sent off for, I'm sorry, I think Todd Cantwell's an absolute joke. The way he goes, there is a slight touch, but down with that, I think he's conned the referee for me.
He has. He's absolutely conned the referee, and it's cheating. There's no other word for it. It's cheating. And it's as simple as that. The guy, yes, Slattery's arm does make contact with Cantwell, but it's sort of between his shoulder and his neck. But Cantwell goes down hanging onto his face, and he was never touched anywhere near there. And that is what makes the referee decide that he's going to send off the other player. So he has conned the referee, he has cheated. I'd be more annoyed with it if it resulted in another goal straight away, or it was like a penalty that was awarded straight away because of it. I have this, I absolutely hate cheats in any way. I think I understand why it happens, and it happens all over the world, but I think it takes away from the game, and it really is something that gets my blood boiling.
This is what I don't get. You've got VAR there. Why is the guy in that VAR room not saying to the referee on that pitch, by the way, that's not a second yellow?
Yeah.
I don't understand why that not happened, because you can clearly see that Todd Cantwell has basically faked that. Yeah. That happens all the time in a game. You're running past somebody, your hand goes up to push them off, to push them away from the ball. The way Cantwell goes down is embarrassing. There's no other word for it. It's embarrassing. Yeah. But why the boy in that V referee, by the way, you've got that wrong. That's not a second booking. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it should be again. You would think that from what VAR's meant to do, right? So it's meant to be a clear and obvious error. Now, for me, that's a clear and obvious error, giving him a second yellow card, because he doesn't make contact with Cantwell's face, and Cantwell has overreacted superbly. I think he's probably going to get an Oscar in a couple of weeks' time when the award ceremony comes up. But that aside, yes, I completely agree with you. The VAR people should be saying to the referee, I think you should go and have a wee look at that. And then if the referee looks at that on the monitor and then comes back and he's still convinced that, his decision is the correct decision, then fair enough. Even though it might still be the wrong decision, at least the referee is sticking by his guns, even though he's been shown advice or given advice that he might have made a mistake. And that's acceptable, because that's what VAR's there for. That's what it's meant to do. But unfortunately, so often you see, it's almost as if the VAR officials are the people who are refereeing the game and not the man in the middle himself. That's my opinion anyway.
It's funny because I made this point to Michael and I think Dave maybe last week or the week before, that I think that now, because of VAR, I think referees are now refereeing games through VAR. I think they are thinking, do you know what? If I make a mistake, VAR will pick it up, and that's not what it's there for. You referee the game on the park, and if you've made an error, then that's what VAR's there to pick it up. But I think now having VAR there is too easy for referees, because they're thinking, do you know what? It doesn't matter. VAR will pick it up, and that's not what it's there for. And that I've thought that for the last couple of weeks, and that I think that's not good enough. Nowhere near good enough.
No, and it's kind of like the old argument when, way back in the day before we ever had anything like VAR, people used to say, the referee should be allowed after the game to come out and say, well, the reason I sent him off, or the reason I gave that penalty, X, Y, Z. And I think it's equally more important now that if the referee makes a decision and then goes and looks at it and then decides to agree with the guy in the room that's not actually at the ground anyway, why have you decided to go along with that when your initial thought as a referee was this is what should have been happening? Because that's what the referee's there for. The VAR thing is only there to help them if it is a clear and obvious error.
Yeah, I completely agree. Rangers obviously do then go on win the game quite comfortable and then by 4-2. What have you made Rangers fun under Michael Beale? Because I think they've probably played maybe 2 or 3 decent games this season. There's been a lot of stuff behind the scenes we know with the Union Bears and the protests and the banners that have gone up. And after the whole thing about the Partick Thistle game where Rangers let Partick Thistle score, Rangers fans were not happy. What have you made of Michael Beale's performances so far as Rangers manager?
I think he's done really well. As I said earlier, he's essentially got the same squad that Van Bronckhorst had. And there are games where Rangers have won under Michael Beale that they wouldn't have won under Van Bronckhorst. He's brought in a couple of other players, and that's the only difference, really. But he's instilled in that squad much more of a belief that they can go, for the 90 minutes, 95 minutes, whatever length of time it is, that they can go on and they can, at the very least, get the draw, but hopefully get the win. So I think he's doing a good job. I understand why some of the fans are upset, but then, do you know what? A lot of Rangers fans have been upset for a very long time, and it's not just something that's got to do with Michael Beale and, the people that are there at the moment. There have been people in the background at Rangers who've made bad mistakes and bad decisions for quite a few years now. And to a certain extent, it's coming out now, that sort of bile towards the sort of back room, if you like. But I think Michael Beale's doing a good job. And all he can do, as a manager, all he can do is pick his team, put them out there. If they're struggling or if they go behind, he's got to then make the tactical switch, to hopefully get the draw or get the victory. And he's doing that. And I think if you were to ask any reasonable football fan, whether they were Rangers fan, Celtic fan, Hearts or whoever, I think they would have to say, yeah, I can see what he's doing and he's doing his best.
Do you think me and Michael talked about this on Friday, but Michael Beale had talked about the fact that they are looking to extend contracts for Ryan Kent and Ryan Jack. But when questioned about Alfredo Morelos, it basically sounded like he wouldn't be that bothered if Alfredo Morelos left. Would that be a good thing for Rangers? Morelos left. He didn't need a fresh start because, again, when he plays, he doesn't look interested a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I've never been really a fan of Alfredo Morelos. He has scored some super goals, and he has had games when he has been unplayable, but he's not consistent. The only thing, for a long time, he was consistent in was getting sent off, and he always looks like an angry man, I don't think I've ever seen him smile. Even when he scored a goal, I don't think I've ever seen him smile, and I think he needs to move on as much as possibly Rangers need him to move on. And you know what? Sakala's a pretty good player and Cholak is a good player. So it's not like from the Celtic perspective where people were like, oh my God, if Giakoumakis goes, what are we going to do? We're only going to have Kyogo as the central striker. That's not how it would be if Morelos was to go, because they would still have Cholak, who's a good player. They would still have Sakala, who's a good player. And you would like to think that they would bring in, a third option who would not necessarily be able to hit the ground running straight away, but would have the potential to slot in, and not really upset the rhythm.
Talking about the semi-final in a few time, I mean, how obviously Celtic Rangers games are massive games anyway, but how big a game is this going to be for Michael Beale? Because if he can stop Celtic winning a treble, that maybe get a lot of Rangers fans that maybe weren't overly convinced by him on?
I think it will. Very much like when they won the Scottish Cup, for the first time in a long time. It was a sort of catalyst. But for me, the next Old Firm game, and I hate to say the Old Firm because I don't like using that term, but the next Celtic Rangers game in the league, if Celtic win that and win it quite convincingly, I think the semi-final will become quite a irrelevance from a Celtic supporter's perspective, because they will then expect Celtic to win, and then it becomes doubly important that Michael Beale gets that win to be able to come out with something in terms of silverware this season. Because let's be honest, if they don't win or get a draw in the next Old Firm game at Celtic Park, they're right out of the chance of catching them. So yeah, the next game at Celtic Park is the most important game in my opinion at the moment. Depending on how that pans out, then the cup semi-final, if Rangers lose the next game in the league with Celtic, then that cup semi-final becomes a huge game for them in terms of getting something. And I don't like to say it, but it could also be the game that might almost be the end of Michael Beale as a Rangers manager, if they were to lose the semi-final as well.
There are some Scottish Cup women's games this afternoon, quarter-final action. The two scores so through: Glasgow Women 0, Motherwell 4. And at the moment, it is Hearts 1, Celtic 0. Get in there! Monica Forsyth with the goal after 60 minutes, but it's half-time in that game. So Hearts might actually win a game against. Won't be the men's game for a change. And the other two games this afternoon, Kilmarnock City at 4. And Rangers take on Hibs also. So keep up to date with those games as they carry on. But at the moment, 1-0. Motherwell start Kettlewell's first defeat. Again, I thought they played well in spells yesterday. How good job do you think Kerr at Motherwell so far since taking over for Stevie Hamill?
Yeah, they've done really, really well. And to a certain extent, I was a wee bit surprised, that they made Stuart Kettlewell the manager, because it wasn't like he had a good run of games, where he'd come in as a temporary replacement and say played 5 or 6 games and won 4 and drawn 2 of them. It was quite quickly that they decided, right, we're going to make him the manager. But he has done really well, and it is, in some ways, it is that new manager bounce that everybody talks about. And it's kind of the reality's coming round a little bit now, although I still think that he'll probably steer them more in the correct direction from now till the end of the season than them sort of sliding backwards again. I really don't see that happening to Motherwell.
I mean, I've watched them talk about excellent. By the way, if anyone hears that noise in the background, it's James's on the background. The dog's name's Bella. Lovely dog, by the way, as well. But yeah, I think Motherwell have done a very good job so far. They are sitting 9th. They are 5 points ahead of Kilmarnock, who are sitting 3rd bottom. But I think Kettlewell's done a good job. I think it's done a very good job. That's the first defeat. They're not going to be judged the games against Rangers. Yesterday, I thought they played well in spells, but they just obviously. So that, I mean, the send-off didn't help, but the goals were quite poor. But I think in terms of Stuart Kettlewell, so far, I've got to say, I've been impressed with him so far. Been very impressed with him so far.
Yeah, he's done a really, really good job. And as you said, the games that Motherwell play against Celtic or Rangers, if they win those games, it's a free hit. You know what I mean? They're more expected to beat the teams that are going to be round about them. And to a certain extent, over the last few years, the likes of Hearts and Aberdeen, they're the teams that people would kind of think have got a better chance of doing something against Celtic and Rangers than, say, Motherwell or, God forbid, Dundee United, who are in a bit of a terrible state at the moment. But, it's important that if they don't win against Celtic or Rangers, they don't see that as being the ending of their season, because they've still got other teams round about them to play. They've got to be thinking of trying to get into the top 6 between now and the end of the season, and that has got to be their target, I think. And if they can get there, it's been a good season for them, and then build on it. The next season coming up, that's when you look for them to build on it. But Motherwell are always, to a certain extent, they're always going to be a sort of mid-table team, and they will sometimes flip with the relegation and stuff like that. But most of the time, they're probably going to be round about the middle of the table, and the best chance of getting some success is going to be in the cup.
Yeah, 100% right. We're now 55 minutes into another hour, 5 minutes to go, and I've put it off for long enough. Let's talk Aberdeen against Hearts. I will get to Hearts on a rant about them, but Aberdeen, very impressive yesterday. I've said before the game that we had to keep an eye on Duke, and he scores 2 of their goals by Duke. He caused a massive threat all through the game. I think Barry Robson's done a great job since he came in, but again, probably, what does that say about the players that weren't good enough under Stephen Glass and Jim Goodwin, but are now playing better for Barry Robson? James, a massive win for Aberdeen now. They are now only 4 points behind Hearts. A huge, huge victory for them now.
Absolutely, and really well deserved. What I saw in the highlights, absolutely well deserved. When Duke signed for Aberdeen, right? I was probably like a lot of people. I'm like, who is this guy? Where have they found him? And I've seen him a few times, and I've been very impressed with him. And he's probably, a lot of Aberdeen's fans would probably disagree with me, but he's probably better than what Aberdeen deserve. And I don't mean that to say that he should be playing for Celtic or he should be playing for Rangers, but he probably should be playing at a slightly higher level. But we'll just have to wait and see. But he was pretty much unplayable yesterday, from what I saw on the highlights. And he took his goals really, really well. And every time I've seen him, I couldn't really fault him. How sometimes you watch players and you see them and they play quite well, but then they kind of go downhill a little bit. I've never actually seen him having a bad game, with the exception probably of the Scottish Cup game. But then the whole Aberdeen team were crap that night anyway, so you can't really single out any player for that one. But no, I've been very well impressed with them. I was actually surprised that they beat Hearts the way that they did, because I honestly thought that Hearts were going to go up there and they would win it. I thought they would take it by the odd goal, sort of like 1-0, 2-1, that kind of thing. I really didn't see the game panning out the way that it did. And I was quite shocked when I saw that result.
Well,
I probably have more faith in Hearts than you.
But in terms of probably, yeah. But in terms of Aberdeen, I thought they started the game very well. They were up for it right for the start, and I hate that. I've said that before. I hate when teams are more up for it than we are. But all over the pitch, they were over us like a rash. They got in Robert Snodgrass's face. They pressed us really hard. Aberdeen yesterday were excellent. Probably one of the best performances they've had for a while. Do you now think that, I know there's been a lot who might get the job, but do you now think that Barry Robson has given himself a match to get that job full time now?
I think he probably has. And I think he deserves to at least be assured that between now and the end of the season, the job is his. We're not going to bring anybody in to use up you at this point. And then they make a decision at the end of the season whether or not they want to go for somebody with, more experience or whatever the case may be. But to a certain extent, I think as well, you have that sort of local knowledge with Barry. He's kind of like a local lad. He understands how it is up there for the supporters and stuff like that. And as a player, I always had a lot of time for him. When he was playing, especially when he played for Celtic, he was a superb player for us, a great servant for us. So I'm a wee bit surprised that he hasn't actually dipped his toe in the managerial waters before now, if I'm being honest. But from what I've heard, he was always very good as a coach, and he seemed to be quite happy doing that particular role. But maybe now he's got a bit of a taste for it. Maybe now he'll be thinking to himself, yeah, I want that job now. And if he gets the chance to go in front of the Aberdeen board, maybe he'll be able to convince them, that he is the man to take them forward.
I'm looking at Aberdeen's fixture before the split. So they play Johnston away, then Kilmarnock at home, Ross County away, and we all know that Aberdeen's away record is not great, but they've got a massive opportunity to pick up some points that are potentially still challenge Hearts for third place, which again, given how poor they've been since the World Cup break, if they were to get third and sneak that place above Hearts.
Yeah, and I suppose to a certain extent, the realistic thing should be, are we going to be able to qualify for Europe? So let's assume that Celtic don't win absolutely everything, or rather Celtic do win everything, and therefore that frees up a place, for another Scottish club to get into Europe. That should be, a target for Aberdeen. However, they should also, I think, from a professional perspective, they should also be thinking to themselves now, yeah, we can get past Hearts. We can get that third spot. That's what we aim for. And if they get through it and they do it, what a season it's been for them. And if they don't get through it, it's still been a great season, because at one point they were looking like, they were going to slide right down that slippery pole all the way to the bottom.
Absolutely. Aberdeen, excellent yesterday. But, Rant, so Hearts yesterday were awful. Now, I'll put this on Twitter after the game yesterday. I've made a few words here. Pathetic, embarrassing, woeful, disgraceful. All the words I could possibly find to talk about that game yesterday. Now, we have only won 3 away games in the league this season. We've won a cup games against Hibs and Hamilton. Our away form is terrible. Now, Robin Nielsen seems to keep playing this 3-4-3 formation, which doesn't work. We're square holes. We're playing players out of position. We've got a tucker in Lawrence Shankland, and we're playing him as deep as centre-back. Robert Snodgrass is excellent, but he's not got the legs in him. And all you've got to do is press Robert Snodgrass, and we have no outball. Barry Mackay has been dreadful for weeks. He doesn't turn up in big games. Yesterday, his attempt to try and stop that first happening was a disgrace. He gets beat on the touchline by Graham Shinnie. No disrespect to Graham Shinnie, but he's not Ronaldo. He's not Jota. Shouldn't be getting beat that easily. Defensively, we are an absolute shambles. We are far too easy to play against. I feel sorry for all the Hearts fans that travelled up yesterday to go to that game and were 3-0 down after 28 minutes. Robin Nielsen, I think, has done a good job. Now, he's not going to get sacked. He's not going to get sacked sitting third place. Nobody's getting sacked in third place. But these performances are happening far too often. We went to Motherwell a few weeks ago, exactly the same thing. His persistence on playing the same formation and the same players, playing folk out of position, is going to be his downfall. Now, obviously, I'm in a massive Hearts fans group chat, and a lot of Hearts fans are raging, and rightly so, because that yesterday was unacceptable. We knew how big that game was. We knew there was every chance that Celtic would beat Hibs. We would potentially go 8 points clear of Hibs and 10 clear of Aberdeen. That was disgraceful. Now, I don't know how well Hearts this season, but that performance has been coming for a long, long time, and it's happened numerous times. Now, the question is, as an outsider, do you think that Robin Nielsen's under pressure? Do you think that it's right to take Hearts forward? Because I tell you what, a lot of Hearts fans don't.
Yeah, I don't think he's under pressure to lose his job. I do think he's the man to take them forward. However, he has to have a plan B. As you say, he plays the same system pretty much all the time. And if it's not working, he has to be flexible enough to say, right, let's not be 3-4-3 or 4-4-2 or whatever it is that he's playing. We need to do something. As I was saying to you earlier, I'm currently reading Callum McGregor's autobiography. And he makes a really good point in it about the time when Brendan Rodgers was the manager of Celtic, and they were playing in a game and they were 1-0 down at half-time. And they were playing the system that they always played. And they went in at half-time and Brendan said, right, we're going to change it and we're going to play this system. And Callum McGregor says in the book, we'd never played it before. We've trained it, but we had never played it in an actual game. But the fact that the players knew what the system was meant to be meant they could go out onto the park in the second half, they could change to that system and eventually win the game. And that seems to be what Hearts don't have at the moment, is if they're going in at half-time and they're 1 or 2 down, they're coming back out and they're playing the same way and it's not working. And if it's not working, you have to be able to do something, So the obvious thing is to think, right, well, let's change the players. But if you're playing the same system and you're bringing in players to directly substitute somebody else in that system and it doesn't work, it can't be the players. It has to be the system that's not quite right. So he has to try and make these little tactical tweaks, shall we say. And I think some of the best managers are very, very good at that. They're looking at the game, they think, right, okay, I've got 3 in the middle at the moment. I need to have an extra body in there, or, I need to take one of those guys up front out of it, and pull him back a wee bit deeper, or, the guy that's playing, behind the striker, I need to push him forward. It's just little things like that can often turn the game. And the fans don't necessarily notice it when it's happening, but if they get the result, they then go on and they win the game, or they get the draw when they were looking absolutely stick on to lose, the fans will appreciate it more. But the fact that they carry on playing the same way and it's just not working, that's what frustrates you.
No, it absolutely does. And I think I've always said that I've been very much a Robbie in. But the thing for me is that Robbie is very restricted in terms of his ability to change things. If something's not working, he doesn't seem to know how to change it. And yesterday's a prime example of that. He actually makes a change at this, I think, before the half time, where he takes off a left back and brings another left back on. It's like, what's the point in that? He took off Alec Conklin, put Stephen Kingsley on. That's not going to do any. That's not going to make any difference. And I think as well that the one thing that I hate, right, you can get beat by quality. I have no problem with that. But what I'm noticing recently is the fact that we are very easy to play against. We get cut open far too easily. And one thing that I really, it should never ever happen. And I say this to my laddie as well. I see in your game, I don't mind. If you get beat, it happens. What I can never accept, lack of effort, a lack of passion, a lack of desire. And too many times recently, I've seen that from Hearts. And I saw that yesterday. Players not want back, players not want to put a challenge in. And that is nowhere near good enough. That's not acceptable on a football pitch. If you get beat by quality, that's fine. But it's never acceptable to go out in that park and not try. And just not try.
Yeah, no, you should always give 100%. I've always felt that as well. And if you lose the game, the fans are going to appreciate the effort. Even if you lose the game, they're going to appreciate the effort that you put in. It's very much a case of, oh, there we go, I've lost my picture. Can you see me? Oh, there we go.
I can see a picture of your lovely house in the background. I can see you now. I've got you now. Got you.
I don't know what happened there. Something interrupted the signal. As I was saying, the fans will appreciate effort every bit as much as they appreciate, victories, especially if it's been it's not like you've gone out and you've lost 10-0. But if you've tried, if you lose a game quite closely and you've given your best out on that park, the fans will appreciate that. It's players that come on, whether it's at the start of the game or part of the game, and you can tell as a fan, you can tell if somebody's up for it. You know what I mean? And I've seen it so many times, even watching Celtic playing, I've seen players come on and they're just not at it, and you think to yourself, why are you on that pitch? Get off. Do you want to be there? If you don't want to be there, move somewhere else. If you're not happy, go somewhere else. I do applaud effort in players, so if it's a tight game and we lose it and the players have given 100%, I'm quite happy about that. I'm not happy they've lost, but I'm happy that the players have given their best. But just unfortunately, their best wasn't good enough.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we spoke about in our group chats, with my Hearts group chat and stuff. It's like we've got Barry Mackay on his day can be exceptional. He's a very good footballer. But when he's not playing well, like yesterday, he's a man down. He just doesn't look interested. He doesn't track back. He doesn't put tackles. I know that's not his game, but again, in these big games, he doesn't turn up. He'll turn up against St Johnstone at home, St Mirren at home, Motherwell, but not for these big games that you need people to battle and work hard. That game yesterday was going to be a hard game. Aberdeen at home are a different prospect away from than they are away from home. Too many of our players yesterday didn't turn up, and that for those Hearts fans to travel all that way to be 3-0 down after 20 minutes was an absolute shambles.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. You know that he's a flair player. Again, he's a flair player, and when he's on his game, he's a joy to watch. But he is a player that if things aren't going particularly well, he has to do the dirty side of the game, if you like. He has to track back. Okay, he's not designed to put in, goal-saving tackles and all that kind of thing. But at least if he's running back with a player, and he's trying to put him off from, sliding that cross in or whatever the case may be, he's affecting the game. It's just not acceptable if he doesn't do that. He has to do something. Oh, there we go. Just tuned in and heard you talking about the Aberdeen game. I was there yesterday. First half was the best I've seen us play in ages. We're now in a situation where we're top six in European football is in our own hands rather than having to rely on other results going our way. And that was from Paul Donaldson. Yeah, absolutely, Paul. We were pretty much saying the same thing a little bit earlier. And I definitely said that I felt that, Aberdeen should be sort of reaching for a European place, if not indeed that third spot. But yeah, it's nice to see the comment coming in there as well from someone who's actually at the game too, which is always a bonus.
Yeah, and I think as well, I think the one thing that Aberdeen need to sort is their away form. Their away form has been not away from home for a while. But again, Aberdeen, I say this a lot, but Aberdeen are a big team. We all know they're a massive, massive team. And I think before the World Cup break, they were 4 points ahead. Now they're only 4 points behind us. So they are doing well. And I think for me now, it's probably Barry Robson's job to lose. He's put himself in a great position to get that job. And if he gets it, I don't know if it'll be a case of, do you know what? We'll give him it to the end of the season and see what happens. And if he does well, maybe give him it permanently. Whether they've got someone else lined up, I know that Neil Lennon's been a folk in the frame as well. But the players at the moment are playing for Barry Robson. But again, back to that question, why wouldn't they do that under Jim Goodwin? Why didn't they do that under Stephen Glass? Was it the way they were coaching? What was it? Because Barry was very inexperienced as a manager. So what was the issue?
I think in some instances, it is very much a personality thing, A manager comes in and not necessarily all the players, but if certain influential players in the squad, for whatever reason, don't get on with the manager, that has an effect, a ripple effect across the rest of the squad. Just by the same token, if a manager comes in and they do get on well with the manager, you have the same ripple effect and it has a much more positive impact on them. And I think to a certain extent, that's probably what was going on. Somebody said to me recently, and I don't know, I can't remember who it was that said it, but I don't know if it's true or not. But somebody said to me recently that Scott Brown was far too big a character when Jim Goodwin came in. So Scott Brown had to go or Jim Goodwin had to go. And to a certain extent, it might be argued that possibly Scott Brown should have stayed and Jim Goodwin shouldn't have been there. But, I think it was kind of obvious. I kind of spotted it a couple of times when I was watching them on Jim Goodwin come in and Scott Brown was on the park. There was a kind of tension. You could see that neither of these guys seemed to sort of take to each other. Now, that could just have been, as I said, a personality clash thing. It might have been the fact that Jim Goodwin didn't like Scott Brown because when he was at Celtic, he always managed to beat, St Mirren, and stuff like that. It could be something as petty as that. But I think Barry Robson has got the players on his side. They're buying into whatever it is that he's doing with them in training. And that will have a big effect as well. The way that he's tactically approaching the games could be different in the way that, Jim Goodwin did, the way that Stephen Glass did. So that will have an impact. But I think, personally, that at the very least, Barry Robson should be there till the end of the season. And if he does get him a European place or manage to get them into third position, he should be getting that job going forward. If it all falls apart in the next week or two, and they suddenly start falling headlong down the table again, then yes, he's not the man for the job. But he's got the job at the moment. He's got the players playing. He's doing well. Then he should be given it. Well, here we go. Aberdeen fans were singing Barry Robson's name during the match. I don't know if that was picked up on the BBC highlights or not. It made a big difference since Jim Goodwin left, and I think Graham Shinney has done on the pitch too. The players were a lot more fired up than they have been at other times this season. Again, that was from Paul Donaldson. Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. No, I didn't pick up on the when I was watching the highlights. I didn't pick up on the chanting of Barry Robson's name, but I had seen a similar comment somewhere else. I think it was on Twitter actually. I've seen a similar comment about them chanting his name. And that is a good sign as well, because that shows you that the fans are getting behind them in a way, and if the fans are buying into it and the players are buying into it on the park, then it should, in theory, lead on to much better times.
Okay, James, as an outsider, I'm going to ask you the question. Who's finishing third?
It's Hearts' position to lose, and I don't see them losing it, if I'm being honest. I think the final standings will be Celtic, Rangers, Hearts, and Aberdeen will be in fourth place. However, if, as I said, Hearts go into a wee bit of a tailspin, and at the same time the Aberdeen players keep marching on and winning games, then that completely turns that on its head, and the pressure then is all on Robbie and Hearts. So it's very close, as you said. From a points perspective, it's very, very close, and it's it's a game slip up, isn't it? Really, away from losing your position, a game, 2 games maximum, and you're no longer in third place. So yeah, it'll be very, very interesting. I think I can safely say that neither of those 2 teams will get relegated this season.
Honestly, I think I said this as well on Twitter. I said this in the group chat as well. If Robbie Nielsen doesn't get Hearts third, then I think questions have to be asked, because we've been up there for quite a while. We have the players. We have had injuries, yes. But performances like yesterday are never acceptable. We've got a big away game coming up after the break against Kilmarnock. My worry is that we tend to lose a lot of goals to are actually strongest at set pieces. So that does worry me. And if Aberdeen can pick up points, although Aberdeen just before the split might work in our favour, but Hearts need to sort their way from out, as do Aberdeen, because it is now very, very tight. And I think as well, what makes it even more interesting is the fact that we know that Celtic and Rangers will win the cup. Like, let's be honest, Celtic and Rangers win the cup, then the team that finishes third will get group stage football.
Yeah.
So it is imperative that you finish such a massive blow to Hearts, because that we had to win that game yesterday. We've not done it. So yeah, I think it's imperative that whoever finishes third, you've got a great chance to get group stage football, which is huge.
Yeah.
But let's move on now to the St Mirren 1, St Mirren 1. Dundee United. Yeah, Dundee United took the lead after 3 minutes this year. St Mirren equalised through a penalty, but again, very, very contentious. I have to say, Stitcher, fantastic goal. Great touch with his right foot. Great finish with his left foot. Fletcher's been a massive player for United. I've got to be honest, he's been a very good player.
Yeah, he has. He's been a revelation for them. It's just a shame that results are not going, hand in hand with how well he's doing. Yeah, it was a funny game. Watching the highlights of that game, it was a strange game, I thought, because when Dundee United scored that goal, I thought, oh, this could be the game when it's now all going to click together for them, And then when St Mirren equalise, I'm not saying I could see it, but I could sense that for the players, maybe there was that doubt starting to creep in again, And I think that's the big problem for Dundee United at the moment. They need to get, a couple of games back to back where they win. They don't have to win fantastically by, a load of goals, but to get 2 victories back to back would be a huge benefit for them, and it would help them in their fight to stay in the Premier League. As things stand at the moment, I personally think that Dundee United will go down.
Yeah, I agree. I've said that already, and I'm actually looking at their 4 fixtures before the split. Rangers away, Hibs at home, Motherwell away. That is a horrible set of fixtures. And again, I agree. I think United are down. You've talked about the fact they need to maybe get 2 results in a row, but they play Rangers. They play Rangers and Hibs after the break. Not games you want to be playing again. They're not when you're in massive trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always seems to be the way, doesn't it? When a team is sort of like in the doldrums and they need to get, wins, they always seem to come up against the next couple of games that they're going to play are the games that in reality you're not thinking they're going to win. So that's when it becomes really important from a player's perspective to really go that extra mile. And let's be honest, I don't think it's beyond Dundee United to win those 2 games. But the way that they are at the moment, I don't think that they will manage it.
I suppose the good thing for Jim Goodwin and his team is the fact that they are not cut adrift. They're only 3 points off Kilmarnock in 10th. And again, after the split, they'll be playing against teams in and around them. So that might give them a little bit of a boost. But what I would say is the last couple of games they played on the Goodwin, they played Aberdeen and they played St Mirren. And for large spells in both those games, they've actually played really well. They've just not been clinical enough. And then they've conceded poor goals as well. But Goodwin so far has done a decent job at the moment.
Yeah, no, he has. He's done that. He's done a good job, and he was kind of, well, for me, he was a bit of a surprise announcement for the job as the manager at Dundee United. Coming as it did, relatively speaking, so quickly after losing his job at Aberdeen, and then of course the first game that he was in charge was against Aberdeen, and I did think to myself, this is probably the game where Dundee United will kick on. He'll get that win against Aberdeen, and then that'll be it. It'll kick them on. And of course, it didn't work out that way. But they're still, as you say, they're still in there. And, let's be honest, they're going to have to scrap for everything they're going to get. As you say, when they're in that last round of fixtures after the league splits, that's when it becomes really important for them to pick up points, so that they're not like in the playoff position, or, they're not just automatically getting relegated. But I don't really see them doing that. I see them being right in there at the bottom and, at best, possibly being in the playoffs. And then depending who comes up from, the Championship, it could be, an absolutely massive banana skin.
Yeah, I got too excited earlier on because, as in the men's game, Celtic in the women's game in the quarterfinal have turned it round. It's now Hearts 1, Celtic 2. Celtic equalised through Hannah Kerner on the 54th minute, and Claire O'Riordan, stop laughing, and Claire O'Riordan scored 7 minutes. So at the moment, It is Hearts 1, 2 in the women's quarter-final. It's also the other latest score. Kilmarnock 1, Kilmarnock 0, Glasgow City 1, and Rayne Hibernian 0. Still a long way to go on those two games. 63 minutes gone in the Hearts Celtic game at 2-1. I hate football. I honestly hate football.
But do you know what, Graham? Right,
I think
when you said earlier, that it was 1-0 to Hearts women, right? I was sorely tempted to say to you, well, do you know what? In the last couple of games, and I've watched the last couple of games for the Celtic women, they have gone behind and they have come back and they've won. And I didn't want to say that, because obviously you were still suffering from
I wish
the
you had
men's
told
game
me that
yesterday. And I didn't want to pile the pressure on you, especially since it's a live show. But I'm not really surprised that the Celtic women have scored a couple of goals there. As I say, I have watched a few of their games this season. Not just their games actually, but the women's game. I have watched a few of the games this season, and I have to say the standard is getting better every week. When I watch it, the standards are getting better, and I think that's partly because Glasgow City are not the all-conquering unit that they once were. There was a time there, what was it, 10 championships in a row or something like that, wasn't it? They won, or 11 championships or whatever it was. And literally they had all the best players. But now it's becoming much more of a sort of professional league in inverted commas. And you can see that, that the teams run about them are getting better. And to be honest, at one point this season, I thought the Celtic ladies team were going to run away with that league. But then they kind of slipped back a little bit and Glasgow City got their noses in front. So I think it's a very competitive league. And anybody that is not watching the women's football at the moment, I would thoroughly recommend that they watch it. I enjoy it. So there you go. That's my plug for the Scottish Women's Premier League.
This has not been a great weekend for me football. This has not been a great weekend for me football-wise. Hearts getting beaten women's game. I'm giving up watching football and watching my laddies team for
And you've still got Liverpool to go, mate, haven't you? They've not played yet this weekend, have they?
Oh, don't remind me. Thankfully, we're not, because it's the FA Cup. We're knowing that. Don't remind me. Why do I bother watching? Seriously. But in terms of the game yesterday, I thought United created all the back in the game again, a few chances, but again, yes, it's a Eunice challenge on Main. Craig Napier gives a penalty. Again, for me, that's not a penalty. There is very minimal, if any, and I do not understand again why the VAR has not said to Craig Napier, do you know what, mate, have a look at that, because I think you got that wrong. It's another very, very poor decision, not a penalty.
Yeah, again, it's one of those ones that when I first saw it at the sort of full speed, if you like, I thought, it probably is, a penalty. It might be on the soft side, but it probably is. But then obviously when they kind of rerun it, and you see the replays and stuff, I'm like, nah, it's not a penalty. And like yourself, I was a wee bit surprised that VAR didn't sort of, and that is the thing, where for us as supporters and fans, to us it seems to be a clear and obvious error. So, that is where VAR is meant to come in, and then the referee goes over. And as I said, if the referee goes over and looks at it and still thinks that his decision is right, then fair enough. That's what he's there for. But the fact that VAR didn't say to him, I think you should check this out again, there may just not be sufficient force to bring him down, or whatever the case may be, is a problem for VAR. And they need to sort it out. Or hire me and you, one or the other.
I think a bit like Todd Cantwell, I think a bit like Todd Cantwell, Curtis Main has gone down very, very easily. He's a big physical laddie, and he goes down like he's been shot or punched by Tyson Fury. Ever up in a million years. And I can understand why, the guy that makes the challenge looks physically shot, because, and again, Jim Good, and you can clearly see why. And the thing is as well, and I keep going back to this point about VAR, but again, are the cost teams. That could cost United a place in the Premier League. You've got to get those right because it's going to cost teams. And it is costing teams.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, as I said, that's why I don't know if it was on the locker room. Somebody mentioned it on the locker room about VAR, or if it was something I've seen on Twitter or whatever. But the fact that I personally agree with this idea that VAR should be based at the ground, whenever they're on, not like in Glasgow or whatever the hell it is that they're based, And it's the same in all the leagues, that the VAR team are not actually at the stadium where the game is being played. And I think that's part of the problem because, like, in the early days in the Premier League in England, there was lots of these things happening that are happening here in Scotland. And it did kind of sort itself out. But it's until it gets to that point where it's sorted itself out, it's still going to be extremely frustrating from a fan's point of view and also a manager's point of view. Because as you say, there does come a point where that is ultimately going to mean a team is winning, and staying in the Premier League or going out of the Premier League, or, if it's a cup game, winning the cup or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, both teams won the game. Niskanen really should score for United. I think Alex Greaves a bit unfortunate for him. Do you think that point really benefits either team? St Mirren are currently sitting 7 with 38 points. United sitting 2 points. Does that point really benefit any of them?
Not really. It's a status quo, isn't it? That's what it is. It's a status quo. Obviously, both teams would have preferred to get all 3 points out of that game. More so probably Dundee United than St Mirren to a certain extent. So it is very much a case of, right, let's pack that game away, move on to the next game, and this is where we're going to have to get our 3 points. But obviously, depending on who the opposition is, will determine, how easy or not it may be to do that. But specifically from a Dundee United point of view, because St Mirren are okay, I think, in terms of, I don't really see them getting dragged into a relegation dogfight now. But from a Dundee United point of view, this is where everybody at the club, the playing staff and the coaching staff and everybody, they all have to sort of develop that siege mentality that Sir Alex Ferguson was an absolute master at developing that with his teams. Even when they were a successful team, they still had that siege mentality. And from a Dundee United perspective, between now and the end of the season, they're going to have to live that siege mentality and scrap for absolutely everything and win ugly. At the end of the day, it's still a win. And if it keeps you in the Premier League, then that's the important thing.
Just St Mirren can get top 6. They're only off Livingston in that 6th place. Do you think it's likely that St Mirren are going to get top 6?
I don't think so. I think Livingston will be good enough to get into to stay there in that position. But again, as we've said earlier in the show, you're only, a loss away, from getting dumped out of the position that you're in, But I think Livingston are probably safe enough where they are, and I think St Mirren are probably safe enough where they are. There isn't really any more, I don't like to say no competitiveness, but the competitiveness is really going to be from 8th position down between now and the end of the season. The guys in the top 6 are probably settled. Potentially Hearts and Aberdeen could maybe, swap places. But I don't really see Rangers slipping up enough for them to lose out on 2nd place. And it would be a major shock, although it could happen, it would be a major shock if Celtic were to lose 1st place and not win the Premier League.
In the women's quarter-final, it's now Rangers 3, Hibs 0. So it looks like Rangers are very much on course for a semi-final place. 2 goals in very quick succession. Still 2-1 Celtic at the moment. Still about 20 minutes to go in that game. To Kilmarnock against St Johnstone. And again, more big decisions in this game. Kilmarnock won, St Johnstone won. Kilmarnock went ahead on 38 minutes through Joe Wright. Dre Wright equalised for St Johnstone after 70 minutes. There was another very big decision in this game. We'll get to that very shortly, but I thought Kilmarnock, who I've been not overly impressed with this season, I'll be honest, but I thought Kilmarnock played very well yesterday and probably really should have taken 3 points out of that game.
Yeah, and to be honest, they have been, in the main, they have been very good at home, Kilmarnock. With the exception of obviously playing the likes of Celtic and Rangers, they have done pretty well in their home games. Again, they're a team whose away form has been patchy, shall we say, to be nice about it. But I honestly felt that was a 3-pointer for Kilmarnock yesterday. The fact that it ended up in a draw, I was surprised, especially when I watched the highlights earlier today. Obviously, highlights don't really give you the full picture. It is what it says it is in the tin. But I just thought that, but for taking a couple of chances, Kilmarnock, should have been in there. St Johnstone, I don't know. They're a bit up or down at the moment, and I think they were fortunate to get their equaliser. They could have actually been pulled back before that. I don't know if this is the controversial point that you were talking about, where one of the players went down. I'm not sure who it was, clutching his face again. Should the referee have stopped it? Because in theory, it was a head injury, and therefore they're supposed to stop it if it's a head injury. Had that happened, would they have gone on to get that equaliser? Probably not. So, I don't know if that's the big decision that you were thinking of when you were talking about it there. But it was a very well-taken goal, I have to say. The equalising goal was a very well-taken goal. So I can't really complain. Although, I must admit, when I was watching it, I wasn't quite screaming at the screen, but I was urging the guy to pass it out to Stevie May on the left. And he decided to have the shot, and I thought, oh God, that's it. They've lost it, But then it came back, and Dre Wright got onto it, and then got that goal. So, what do I know?
Latest updates on the final. Rangers are now 4-0 up against Hibernian after 35 minutes. And it's Kilmarnock 0, Glasgow City 2. So at the moment, the teams that are going through the semi-final at the moment are Motherwell, Celtic, Glasgow City and Rangers. I'm still a way to go 50 minutes in the Hearts game. But yeah, 4-0 to Rangers. They are very comfortable. The contentious decisions, I hadn't even thought about the one you mentioned there, but the two contentious ones that I want to talk about at the moment. The disallowed goal for Kyle Vassell. Now, it was given for a handball. Now, I know the rules of the game say I don't know what Vassell can do about that because the ball's headed onto him. He's got his arm locked in. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to do about it. I think that's very harsh.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like I said in the WhatsApp chat a couple of weeks ago, the only way that you're going to stop these things from happening is for the players to have their arms strapped to their side throughout the game so that they can't, raise them, and put them out to the side and all that kind of stuff. Because it is, I know they say that it's not a natural position. Well, I'm sorry, I would disagree with that. Because when you're running, right, have you ever seen anybody running, right, with both arms at the side or with their hands in their pockets if they've got pockets? Of course you don't, because your arms are part of that momentum, that movement. It's required. It's the same, when a player's jumping for the, to head a ball. Part of that momentum and that movement is then using their arms for that sort of lift, So it is, to me, it's natural and it's part and parcel of the game. A handball, for me, should be where a player has absolutely, definitely gone like that. and swipe the ball away, or the goalkeeper's at his goal, and the ball's heading towards the net, and a defender slides in, and uses his hand to put it round the post or something. To me, they're deliberate handballs. But some of the ones that they're given as decisions, are not deliberate, because what else can the player do with his hand or his arm? Where is he going to put it?
Exactly. I mean, Kilmarnock did get the goal. Joe Wright with a goal. Poor goalkeeping for me for Ryan Matthews. He's got to do better than that. Obviously, you talked about the direct goal, and actually, I agree with you. I actually couldn't believe that he didn't pass it at first. I thought he's made an absolute muck up of that. But it's a great strike from Jay Wright into the corner. Yeah. Very, very good goal. And I think the other big decision I want to talk about, and this is the worst for me. Ball's put into the box. Clearly, Andy Considine has his hand up. It hits his hand, and it doesn't get given. I do not understand again why the referee hasn't been asked. You don't even need the referee to look at that. He's in a good position. Yeah. But I do not understand why the referee in that VAR room has not said to the referee on the pitch, you need to go look at that as a handball. That, for me, is the one of the weekend. It's a deliberate handball, and you've only got to look at Andy Considine's face. He knows that's a penalty. Honestly, that's the worst of the weekend for me.
Yeah. Absolutely not. And you know what they do say, don't they, that, you can tell by a player's reaction, whether or not he's gotten away with one, and that was pretty obvious that he knew he'd gotten away with one, And again, I completely agree with you. The VAR guy should be saying to the referee, I think you should go and have a look at that. And again, if the referee goes and looks at it and he still thinks, no, that's not a penalty, then fair enough. But there has got to be, somebody just saying to him, can you just have a wee look at that and tell me what you think? But that's not the way that it's working. It seems to be that it goes the opposite way. The referee makes his decision, and then the next thing he's getting called over to go and check the monitor. And in that instance, I always feel that the guy in the VAR room is actually saying to the referee, do you know what? You should be given a free kick there. You should be given a penalty there. You should be doing X, Y, Z. Even though the referee is probably 99.9% in his own mind when he gave the decision, confident that he's got it right. But then he's having a look at the monitor, and then somebody else is saying, no, I think you were wrong with that. I think you should do this. And then he's like, all right, okay, then I'll do that. And that's where, it should be, the final decision should always be the referee on the field. Rightly or wrongly, the decision should be his. If he comes and he looks at something in VAR and he says, no, I'm happy with my first decision, then that's fair enough. You can't argue with that. But if he goes over and then he completely reverses it, then you have to be questioning why is he reversing that? Just like, as you say, when a player is jumping and his hand's up in the air and it hits the ball or the ball hits his hand, it's pretty obvious what's happened. The referee really should be given the penalty in that instance anyway. It shouldn't really need somebody to say, come and have a look at that. So, just sometimes wonder about do they know the rules of the game?
Yeah, it looks Shen Mengyu has wrapped up the game for Celtic in the Scottish after 81 minutes. So it looks like, unfortunately, Hearts have not had the best weekend this weekend, but there you go. So
a good wee player is that, Shen. Very good player.
So Kilmarnock won, St Johnstone won. Again, a point doesn't really benefit Kilmarnock. They're only a point in front of Ross County in second bottom. Do you think Derek McInnes can take positives for that game yesterday? Because for large spells in that game, they did play well.
I think that's the only positive that you can take from it, is how well they did perform. And again, it's very much about taking that good form and good performance and actually transferring that into an away game and getting a result at an away game, because they are not particularly good away from home, Kilmarnock. But I'm sure although he probably I didn't actually see him being interviewed, so he probably didn't say, that he was really disappointed, that they didn't win the game. But I'm sure he probably would have been very disappointed that they didn't win the game, because he would have known that they had done more than enough to win the game, but it was just some poor finishing in the end. And it happens to all teams. Celtic missed some great chances at the weekend there against Hibs as well. So, and they have done over the last couple of weeks. So that happens to everybody. But when you're in that sort of dogfight, if you like, it's even more important that you don't miss those chances.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of St Johnstone, again, they've been a bit, I would say probably comfortably 8th. What have you made of them so far this season?
Do you know what? Since they won the cup, I really thought they were going to kick on. But then, of course, obviously they lost a couple of very influential players, and they just literally nosedived from then. Earlier on this season, apart from a couple of games, I thought they're maybe going to pull themselves together. But they're very much up and down. I've seen them a couple of times this season when I've saw them playing quite well. And I saw them in a couple of other games when they've just not been at it. So it's a consistency thing more than anything, I think. I really don't see them being in the position of getting put into a playoff situation. I don't really think they're going to go that badly between now and the end of the season. But they're going to be kind of like mid-table of the split, if you know what I mean. So that bottom half of the table, I can see St Johnstone being sort of in the middle of that group and, relatively speaking, being safe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The final game of the weekend was at the Tony Macaroni, where Livingston beat Ross County by 2-1. Joel Newbley after 7 minutes, Nicky Devlin after 38. Simon Murray got his first goal for Ross County, but Livingston managed to hold out and get again, Livingston very up and down this season. That was their first win in the 4 games. A huge victory for them. I think deserved as well on a whole.
Yeah, I think over the piece, they were the better team. And I must admit, I have been quite impressed by that lad Newbley. I had never ever heard of him before. He went to Livingston, and I've been quite impressed with him all round. He's a big lad, but do you know what? His all round play is pretty good. The first time I seen him playing, I thought he's just going to be one of these people that stands up there in the opposition's penalty box, and they're just going to ping a big ball up to him, and hopefully, he's going to nod it into the back of the net. But he's actually got quite good feet for a big fella. So as long as he's in the team, they seem to do better than when he's not in the team. A couple of games I watched when he was out injured, they didn't seem to be quite as effective at the top end of the pitch. But yesterday he was back in, and they did seem to be that unit again, and they were pretty effective. That was a game I kind of felt possibly Ross County could get something out of, just because of the last couple of results that Livingston had had. And they needed it, let's be honest. Ross County needed it. At the very least, they needed a point. Ideally, they needed 3. But as you say, it wasn't to be. Again, they done well. And when they got the goal back, initially, again, it was going to be knocked off for being offside. But with VAR, they got it right. That was one that they got right. And the goal was allowed to stand.
The first one understand.
I can understand why it was looked at. But when you see it back, yeah, it was tight. But when you see it back, the boy Murray was, he wanted it. And at the end of the day, that's why he got it. He absolutely wanted to get that. And he went in there and he got it. It was a bit like Mugabe in the Motherwell game. He wanted that ball. So he went in there and he got it. And that's that desire that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always think that Livingston punch above their weight. They're never really in relegation trouble. They're always in and around that kind of top 6 area. And again, I think David Martindale, I've said this numerous times before, I think he's very underrated. He's a very, very good manager. He gets the best out of that squad. And I agree with you completely. I think Joe Nubley is a fantastic player. And I think he's just signed a new 1 year with Livingston, which is a huge boost because he is a huge player. Physically, he's just an exceptionally good player.
Yeah, aye. In fact, I didn't realise until I was watching the highlights earlier that he had signed, like an extension, because I had been reading a couple of days before that potentially, he was away at the end of the season. But then in saying that, as you say, David Martindale, he seems to be able to pick these players up. And that says a lot for him as a manager as well, that he obviously, I'm not saying he goes to lots and lots of games, and he watches these players, but he's obviously watching a lot of video evidence on players. And he probably does go to watch them, once he's seen them maybe once or twice on videotape, he probably does go to watch them live. And he's got a very good eye for a player. And he seems to be able to take players who are, shall we say, in the doldrums, in the lower divisions down in England, and he brings them up to Scotland and just seems to bring them up a level. So that is a great advantage for him as a manager. Although you and I know that I have, in the past, been a wee bit disparaging about him, but all in jest, of course.
I mean, in terms of Ross County, again, I think Malcolm Mackay's job, they are very much an relegation battle, though. They are second bottom of the league. What have you made of Malcolm Mackay said this season? That it is basically going to be either Mark occupying that second bottom place.
Yeah. I think, see, if I'm being absolutely honest, right, I never really thought Malcolm Mackay was going to make it as a coach, let alone a manager. I just didn't feel that he had that bit about him. And I'd call him as a player, and he wasn't the best of players. He was a decent player, but he wasn't the best of players. But he does seem to be able to get something out of the players at Ross County. Not so much this season, but last season they started very badly, and they kind of steadied the ship. And I felt this season that they probably would be kind of like mid-table or just at the top end of the bottom half, when they were going into the split. I've been quite surprised at the tailspin they've gone into. I don't see them staying up. I don't even see them being in the playoff. I think there'll be a straightforward relegation. And I think they'll be looking for a new manager.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. We have about to go, and it's the end of our Premiership roundup. I want to now get James's thoughts, because this is something I've talked about with Michael on Friday. I want to get James's thoughts on this as somebody else who's a Celtic fan as well. I mean, it's difficult to answer this, I know, but how do we make the Scottish Premier League more competitive? Because at the moment, Celtic in first are 37 points ahead of Hearts in third. Rangers are 28 points ahead of Hearts. So you're talking about the third best team in Scotland are miles behind Celtic and Rangers. Now, I know there's a big disparity between the finances that teams have got, but it's been 40 years since anyone else apart from Celtic and Rangers won the league. How do we make this league more competitive? Because I think it is getting boring. Celtic and Rangers win pretty much. What do we do to make this league more competitive? Because if you're from England, say for example, and you're thinking, I'll have a look and see what the Scottish League's like, and you're seeing the top two are so far ahead of everyone else, you're thinking, that's not a great league. How do we make it more competitive? Do we do league reconstruction? Do we make it an 18-team league? How do we do it? Because it is getting very stale now.
Yeah. In all honesty, I don't really think making it an 18-team league would make that much of a difference, because just purely and simply, Celtic and Rangers are the biggest two clubs in the country. Financially, you're never going to be able to compete with them from a Hearts, Aberdeen point of view, Hibs point of view, because you're not getting runs in Europe and earning money that way. So you're relying on what you bring in through the gate, on a bi-weekly basis, and potentially runs in the cup competitions, and essentially winning, the League Cup or the Scottish Cup and getting the top prize for that. So from a financial standpoint, it would be almost impossible. Certainly the business model at Celtic is, I know a lot of Celtic supporters don't like this, but it is a brilliant business model, and you can't argue with it. What they should do, in my opinion, is what Aberdeen and Dundee United did in the 80s. They came down to the likes of the Central Belt and they picked up the players at the boys' clubs that potentially would go to Rangers and potentially would go to Celtic. And they offered them a path to full-time football, that if they had gone to Celtic and Rangers, because of the structures at those clubs, it was extremely difficult for them to make it into the first team. But Dundee United and Aberdeen were very attractive prospects that a youngster could go up to those clubs and within a few years could be making it into the first team. And that was back when Dundee United and Aberdeen were regularly qualifying for Europe as well. And of course, they both won European competitions back then as well. So they need to kind of get back to that. But it's very difficult to do that because a lot of kids, they want to play for Rangers. They want to play for Celtic because that's the team that they support. And I understand that. I do completely understand that. However, unless you're an exceptional young footballer who potentially is going to go on and become an internationalist, for instance, if you're a half-decent player, the chances are that you're not going to walk into a Celtic or a Rangers. But if you go to a club out with those two and you do well, then you might get that opportunity of playing for your boyhood club. But along the way, you're helping those smaller teams, in inverted commas, get better. And that's the way that it should go, in my opinion. And I think I can safely say that because, I watched how Dundee United and Aberdeen did so well. I mean, I'm talking about guys like Alec McLeish, Willie Miller, these boys who essentially were West of Scotland boys, but they went up to Aberdeen and they went on and they become European winners. And they went on and they became Scotland internationalists, But the chances are that they might never have played for Celtic or Rangers. But they took that chance, and it's a big chance that you have to take. And at a young age, it's not easy, but that's where your parents, it's important that your parents don't say, no, you need to sign for Celtic, you need to sign for Rangers, or in your case, God forbid, Graham, you need to sign for Hearts, right? Because that's the club that you love. And obviously, if your boy plays football, you want him to play for your team. It's natural. I mean, it happened to me. I was never a great footballer when I was a boy. I was all right, but I was never a great player. And I allowed my dad to talk me out of signing for Clyde because he was like, oh, no, you'll play for the Celtic one day, son. I knew in my heart that I would never play for Celtic. I wasn't good enough to get signed by Celtic, but I just might have been good enough if I had done well at a club like Clyde, where I might have got in to be a squad player at the likes of Celtic. But because my dad, was like, no, you're going to be a Celtic player, son. I was like, right, okay. And I never did it. So, and in all honesty, looking back on it, see if it had been Rangers, I'd have probably signed for Rangers, even though it would have probably killed them. If I hadn't done so. But if there was, if I had honestly thought that there was a chance for me to do quite well, I would have gone and done it, but I wasn't strong enough in my own character, to stand up to my dad, who was like, no, you've got to play for a Celtic, son, even though I knew that wasn't going to happen. So to me, young players, their parents have to be realistic as well. And while they might want them to play for the big teams, they should say, well, do you know what? Start off at a slightly lower level and work your way up. Learn how to become a football player. Yes, at the big clubs, they can teach you all about, nutrition and all the rest of these fancy things in the modern football game. But it's only by coming up through the ranks that you actually learn how to be a footballer. That's why years back in the 60s, the likes of Celtic and Rangers sent their B team players to play junior football, because it was how they learned to be tough footballers. So there you go. That's a long-winded answer.
Yeah. That's a very good answer. Well, we are now at the 2 hours. It's been a very, very busy show. As always, it just remains for me to thank my very good sidekick, James E. You can catch James E on Indie Live on a Thursday night from 7 till 9 for his Our Country show, and on the Saturday at 10 o'clock till 12 for his big Saturday show. We are back next Friday for the Locker Room. There are no games next week, but Scotland are playing on the Saturday, so we'll be doing a special show next Friday and the Saturday after that against Cyprus, and then the Tuesday after that we play Spain. So we've got a few Scotland shows to come. Hopefully Michael's back maybe next week, but if he's not, who cares? I'm here anyway. But thank you very much to James for joining me, and thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.